Now, the Senate is responsible in particular for foreign policy, especially the military, and for financial policy, determining taxation, for example. Senators served one-year terms, and the heads of state in the Senate system were a set of two councils. Councils have what the Romans called imperium. The Romans have a surprising number of words for power, but imperium is basically a word that means judicial and military authority. It's the word from which we eventually get emperor and empire. So the councils served together, and they were able to veto each other, which was intended to prevent one man from ruling the show. They were, in emergencies, able to set up 6-month dictatorships, but that was intended to be a last resort. And the councils, incidentally, become the other main way that Romans tell time in their history. So we've talked about AUC, which, if you recall, stands for from the founding of the city. And we could also talk about in the councilship of such and such a person, in the councilship of such and such a person, something happened. That's another common way in which Romans would tell their history. These councils, they served as generals in times of war, served as judges for important disputes, and they were able to wield the symbol of authority in imperial Rome, which is called the fasces, which was basically a bundle of sticks. Of course, this is where we get the word fascism. And the symbol for authority was another holdover from the Etruscan culture that we discussed earlier. In addition to the councils, another important position in the Roman Republic was that of the censor, who was responsible for public morals and for administering the census. Now, the census involved figuring out how many people were in Rome at a time, how many of them had a voice in the government, how much land they owned, how many slaves they owned, so on and so forth. And of course, they were best known for their function from which we get the word censorship. So they're responsible for upholding Roman morality, and they can actually give a family a black mark if they fail to uphold Roman morality. And this black mark prevents them from participating in the Roman Republic politically. So it's actually a huge source of shame, and it also removes the advantages that families come to depend on. So this was something to be avoided, of course, at all costs. Now, the sorts of things that can earn you a black mark would be, for example, luxury. The Romans prided themselves on being very Spartan, which sounds kind of ironic. Basically, they were regimented. They were not going to be the ones to have large meals and to have large, and fancy meals. They want to be efficient. Acting and prostitution, which apparently they didn't see much of a difference between, those were both things that could also earn you black marks. And cruelty to slaves could also earn you a black mark. Now, this wasn't about upholding slaves' rights. That's something that Romans weren't really concerned with at all. But what they were really concerned with was efficiency. So you can get a black mark for neglecting your fields and not farming them. And in sort of the same way, if you're cruel to slaves, then they're not able to do so much work, and that's considered to be wasteful and inefficient. And these black marks depended not only on what you do, but also on what your family does. So the head of the family, the pater familias, had absolute authority, even in life or death, over their spouses and their family, and also their slaves. But that also means that anything those family members did reflected on the head of the family. So if a son, for instance, became an actor, then the father received a black mark.